Hi, I'm Lindsay.
And I'm Marshall. Welcome to Tumble, the show where we explore stories of science discovery.
The process of learning and speaking a new language has always just blown my mind. That's part of the reason why I wanted to talk to Evan Kidd, an Australian scientist who's studying language in the Netherlands.
The best language learners are children. And that's really remarkable, right? Because children come into the world without any knowledge of what a language should be like. It seems something that's so effortless to us and comes so easily. We often don't realize that it's incredibly complex. No other animal has a communicative system as complex as language.
Because language is unique to humans and it's such a huge part of our lives, scientists have long wondered why we developed language as a species and how our brains learn it so well. They're working on a couple of theories or ideas about it.
So some people have argued that because it's so complex, that we actually are born with lots of information about language in our brains.
So just as we're born with hair and legs and hands,
the idea is that our brain comes packaged with language, ready to sprout when we're old enough.
But Evan thinks that there's a big problem with that theory.
So if you take a human baby that's born to, say, two French-speaking parents, and that family moves to, let's say, China, that baby will learn Chinese just as well as children whose parents and grandparents and great-grandparents have lived in China all their lives.
So it wouldn't be like there's a gene for speaking French and a gene for speaking Chinese. Like, it can't be that specific because they're really different languages.
It has to be a gene for learning all the ways in which languages can be different. Because children, for instance, have a long childhood, they hear lots and lots of examples of speech all the time. And then what they're doing as they're hearing this is constantly changing their understanding of language to a point that once they become about 4 or 5, they're pretty good users of the language.
That makes sense. So it doesn't matter which language, if you're exposed to it since you're born, you're eventually going to understand and speak it perfectly.
That's the theory that Evan is trying to test, along with many other scientists.
It's very difficult for us to study the whole process. The way that we approach it is by looking at different parts of the problem, say looking at the sound or the grammar or even word learning, and then trying to come up with a complete picture.
Evan's question is about how kids learn and understand grammar or how words go together in a certain order.
So I'm interested in how, for instance, they might understand that the mouse chased the cat is very different from the cat chased the mouse.
Grammar is about learning the rules of how the language works, and the rules can be very complicated. So Evan came up with experiments to look inside the language learner's mind.
In my lab, we use 2 types of techniques. So one of them is called eye tracking. When you're hearing language and that language describes an event that you can see, it's impossible for the eyes not to follow the language, if that makes sense.
So if you were a kid in Evan's eye tracking experiment, you'd go and sit in front of a computer screen that had 2 pictures. One of a cat chasing a mouse and another of a mouse chasing a cat. Then you'll hear the sentence, "The cat chases the mouse."
And then we'll have a little camera that's at the bottom of the screen, and that records where the child is looking as they're hearing language. If we can match up where they're looking with the sentence that they're hearing, then we can say something about how they understand the sentence as they're hearing it. What we also do is we actually measure brain activity of very young infants as well, because actually children are learning about language right from pretty much when they're in the womb.
That's the beginning of language. And as soon as we're born, we hear it more and more.
So we use this technique where we can record their brain activity in response to sounds and sentences and words and things like that. And that lets us understand, or that enables us to understand what they might know before they can even speak. And so using this particular technique, what we've found is that around 9 months of age, some children are really good at finding those words, and some children aren't so good at finding those words, but they're going to catch up pretty soon later.
Bit by bit, Evan's experiments are adding pieces of knowledge to that big question, why we have language and how we learn it. Evan still wants to know how children take everything that they hear and learn to make sentences with ideas that can be pretty complicated. Thanks to Evan Kidd, senior scientist at the Max Planck Institute for Psycholinguistics.
Sarah Lentz is our associate producer.
I'm Lindsay Patterson, and I host and produce this show.
And I'm Marshall Escamilla, and I make all of the music. Thanks for listening, and tune in next time for more stories of science discovery.